Afternoon all. Baking in the sun and the lights, so this is going to be a bit sweaty. So, listening to the last speakers, I'm going to be making similar points in different ways, but I think there's a positive message I want to get across that over the last few years, society has woken up to the idea of where the risks are, and there's still work to do. But I generally believe that there is a positive direction of travel, and one of the key points that I wanted to take this opportunity to use was to communicate getting the basics right as you move forward, make changes, invest, and then keep on top of it, because we know the pace of change for technology and the demands of business and the society that we live in force that change. So, what are the basics? Obviously, it's all about protecting the information that matters to you. So what are the assets that you have and hold most dear? So if you're a business, that's the customer data in any context. And I was hearing previously about identity. We absolutely respect the value and uniqueness of identity because you can't change it. It's sort of who you are, that's how you're born, and you can't really afford to mess with that. Obviously, organisations develop intellectual property, that's sort of how they work, and they then generate lots of business data, which becomes sensitive to the way they can operate in the future. So businesses, obviously, a big area to think about for assets, but on an individual basis, people have that identity issue. They're the ones that businesses need to protect that data for. Digital fingerprints, you can't change fingerprints type issue. And of course all the personal information that you accrue over time. So that all needs to be considered as part of your asset base. So then what are the risks that are going to affect the way you can use those assets? How are you going to expose them to the sorts of risks that you would rather they weren't exposed to? But actually, you've got to do business, you've got to operate, you've got to live your life. So how do you address the impact if the worst happened? You've got to be able to think that through. So what might you do to manage those risks then? What sorts of things can you do? And how do you know they're working? It's all very well to say, yeah, well, we'll just buy that thing. I think you probably need to do a bit more than buy the thing. At least you'll need to install it and maybe check that it worked. So you've got to know what your controls are that absolutely have to be applied. Don't overkill it though, because you could have an adverse effect. So you need to be proportionate, really important consideration. And whilst that might sound great for a big business that's thinking, yeah, we've got millions to spend and we've got to do this new thing and we'll take a good chunk of the budget and put it on security, you also just heard about how down the stack, smaller organisations don't have those budgets, they don't have the people, they don't have the talent. So you've still got to think about how to make the shrewd and proportionate investment in what you're seeking to achieve. So it's being thoughtful about the application of the risk management. Having done all of that stuff, you need to review the work that you've done to make sure that is providing the effect you need. And think about the opportunity to invest too. If you are lucky enough to have a budget that is going to see some of those tools refreshed, or as part of your overall business investment plan, you're going to be buying some new super duper business support system, there's the opportunity to make sure it looks after your security issues better than the previous version. So checking the effectiveness is a crucial part of this, not in a position yet where we can fire and forget and say, yeah, security, bought that, done, tick, move on. You can't do that. I'm afraid, yeah, maybe in the future, but not just now. Crucial point, and part of why I'm here, is to talk about this with your colleagues. If it's an individual thing, you might talk about it with your family. I'm doing this, Be aware of risks changing. It's that awareness and making sure people know what's expected of them. You cannot hold people accountable for making errors for which they did not even understand there was a possibility of making the error. You have to be reasonable about giving people the clarity they need and the expectations. And also, I want to pick up on what was said before, don't make it like the individual is the weakest link in the chain. Make it like the individual is the first line of defence. Really important point. Get the mindset right that everyone has a role in security, and by doing the right things, they're going to help the whole organisation move forward. So So I mentioned change, and this is the whole point about keeping this investment sound. When we choose to use new things or operate our business or the way we live our life in a different way, we're going to make some changes, and the risks are going to change accordingly. So just to set that out in simplistic terms, if we want to connect in new ways, whether we are an individual looking to join a social network, or we are a supplier moving into the marketplace with a new product and we decide to launch it in a different way with a different engagement model, all of those changes are obviously set out with business or individual benefits in mind, but they carry new risk. Individuals may choose to store data in different ways. What about, the fantastic opportunity to store all your photos in the cloud? Great, but okay, are you sure all of those photos need to be in the cloud? And are you sure that you know what's going on there? And then new locations. The pandemic obviously had an impact on the way a lot of organisations operated, and that wasn't risk-free, but generally speaking, you could argue everyone learned a lot about that and brought a bit more thoughtfulness to the way they operate IT in their own environment at home. But also the model that was, again, in the previous talk about just move stuff to the cloud then, it's someone else's problem. Oh no, just because you don't have that proximity to where your data's being stored doesn't mean it's not your responsibility anymore. So the risks may be different, may be lower, but they're still your risks and you need to properly manage them. So then you get into the tough stuff. You're going to make a change, and it might be that you do have a good awareness of what the risks associated with that change might be, but you may not have the means to manage it. If you're a smaller organisation with that one security expert that you treasure and hope he's able to or she's able to look after this stuff, as well as all the other things that keep them busy, well, does that mean you can't proceed? Do you really want to be in a situation where your business can't progress because you can't take on the benefits of a new system and then think about how to manage the risks that go with it? Not an easy one to solve. There isn't a magic bullet for that one, I'm afraid. That one you really do need to think about up front of a change. And then, of course, the next piece is you could bring that new IT solution I mentioned earlier into play. But that solution itself may not have all the answers built in. They don't know your company. They're selling a product to potentially millions of companies, and they want to be able to get the best fit for the business purpose. They're not particularly going to sweat the individual and unique circumstances that you have for yourself. And therefore, you are still going to have to think about a way of making that fit and how that's going to work in the long term for support. So does that mean that the product that's been identified as the best business solution because of potential shortcomings on the security side is now the wrong solution? Not necessarily. Again, you need to have some really thoughtful discussions. And that's really why I'm talking about making changes with cyber in mind. It's that idea of keeping the cybersecurity on the best footing it can be. And so wherever you're at, get that conversation going early on. If you have an opportunity to influence it or just ask questions, that would not be the worst thing you could do. No one's going to say, oh, that's a really unhelpful question. We've thought of every possible security risk there is to this proposal and go away. I just don't see that happening in this day and age. As I say, I think in a positive way, the culture's moved on sufficiently now to be able to say, yeah, good point. Actually, ooh, have we got anyone that knows about that? Type thing. So I think that mindset is now to the positive. Don't forget that if you're looking to something that is in the open marketplace, again, as the earlier talk was saying, you've got this awkward imbalance because of the way that the whole cyber environment has changed over the introduction of the internet. You have got adversaries everywhere, and when you make changes, you're going to get some new adversaries. So you might lock off some old stuff and stop worrying about one particular set, but with that comes the fun and games of opening the door to something new and unknown, potentially. So how are you going to deal with that? And again, there may not be a magic bullet, but at least being aware that that's changing has got to help. Absolutely. Awareness is the key on that one. But we talked about first line of defence for the individuals. It's not about the technology in isolation. You make a change because it's going to make business easier or your personal life is going to be richer for all that new tech that you've played with. But do you know what you're doing? Do the individuals know what you expect to happen? It's really important that we get that training in, people feel confident and assured. Maybe they have got some of that cyber message really strongly, and that's really good, but they may inadvertently overprotect. And remember what I was saying before about getting the balance right and proportionality. If people are trained and understand what they can do to help, security should be an enabler. It shouldn't lock down the business to a point where individuals think they're doing the right thing but are actually inhibiting your business by telling customers that they can't do that or that's not allowed or whatever. It might sound sensible and it might feel like the right thing, but getting that balance right is really quite important. So keeping cyber aligned will make the best of the change, no two ways about it. Have it in mind from the outset, even if you are on the smallest end of the budget of the amount of security resource you've got to track things, just make those update emails available to the right people, keep the security people in the loop, make sure that basically there's no surprises. And that will keep you on the right side. You'll be in the best place if the worst does happen, because of course there shouldn't have been any gaps developing through that approach. And basically that's making the point of starting as you need to go on. It sounds great to talk about doing these things and everyone would agree and yeah, that's how we mean to do it, but actually meaning to do it and actually doing it are often very different things. So you do need to instill that communication, that dialogue, and keep that security spirit where it needs to be. But what else might you need to do? Because it's not going to get any easier, not for a while. So I keep talking about awareness. Keep that view of where are the risks? Are you storing new data in new ways, in new places that could put you in more jeopardy? Are there things that you would like to see in a new solution that the providers have gone a long way to meet but aren't quite there? What does that leave you to do? Don't make an assumption that if they've done all of that stuff, then the other thing will be okay. Have that open discussion with the supplier. They should be able to help you become aware. The wider environment, obviously, be aware of the wider reliance that people have on mobile technology, cloud, social media, and so on. And don't need to labour the point too much about phishing, but the use of email to infiltrate systems is understood. People are sort of aware of it, but it still happens. So just that wider environmental concern, nothing to do with systems you've got. If you've got the basics like email, then you've got a risk. In terms of maintenance of the system, once again, awareness, training, effectiveness, making sure they remain effective, making sure that new people are inducted fully. You're not expecting them to learn from the person at the next desk. How does that work when everyone's working from home? You've got to make sure there's a formal security awareness component to the change that's being made. Environment, becoming more cyber savvy, brilliant. As I said at the introduction, I believe that we are getting, as a society across the world, a lot more cyber savvy. Can you rely on the environments providing you more security? Well, to an extent, and again, you heard that earlier, you could move it to the cloud. Yay! But actually, you do need to do some thinking because the risk is still your risk. And that isn't going to go away fundamentally. You own the data you've collected. So what about the technology? Well, we said earlier, the tools might have been developed for a large proportion of your operational risks, but you may still have some residual ones. Do you know what they are? Can you work with the technology vendor to close some of those? They might be able to tailor it or configure it in a way that makes that easier for you. What about extra measures that you might need to put in place? Because the tool's doing its job okay, but there's a potential that somebody could accidentally delete all of your records. Hopefully not, but things have happened. Availability of data is a security concern. If somebody can easily delete it all, then you've not got it available anymore, and then you've got another security problem. So, oops. So think about those sorts of aspects. you may well find that you've been presented with a challenge because of some other change, and the business critical system is now showing a potential deficiency. Not their challenge as such, but do you get good support with that company? Are they able to come in, give you some consultancy, work out is there a way to address that gap? That would be good, wouldn't it? And separately, how might the company provide assurance that any weaknesses that are discovered can be quickly remedied? If they've got a vulnerability management plan that you can sign up to and aligns with your own policies and strategy for system maintenance that you've got capacity to run. Do they expect you to do it every week? That might be a bit burdensome, and again, it's probably not proportionate. So get the balance right on how those things work. So the other piece that I said in the intro piece for this as well, about having top-up tools and the plethora of extra add-ons that you might choose to buy nowadays to do a bit of security on the network and a bit of security for antivirus and a bit on anti-phishing and da-da-da-da. You know, all of these things actually expand the threat surface. So potentially there's more code to go wrong, there's more processes to have to think about, and they too could open the door to a further weakness. So are there going to be needs to add other controls around any changes that you make, and are you ready for those add-on pieces? Finally, make the point, secure by design. If you know that a product has been designed with security at the heart of it, you're sort of starting in a better place than somebody that said, oh, yeah, I guess that might be a problem, quick, let's add that at the end. Generally speaking, I would suggest that the world has moved on in a good way. Software development techniques and the way that processes are rolled out into organisations nowadays tend to have taken that secure by design approach, and that's increasingly a case. So it's good to see that that is starting to properly embed. And most people are fully familiar with the Windows update model and the way phones have their systems updated all the time. Apps on your phones get updated all the time with various security updates. That mindset of having the security approach built in is something people that actually it's good. They expect it. You should be then quite surprised if somebody comes along and says, well, no, we don't need to patch our stuff. Really? So you can start having different dialogues around that with your technology suppliers. Finally, no one can be an expert in everything. It's just easy to ask for help. There's a plethora of support and advice available. Don't be shy. You don't need to give away your family secrets. You don't need to give away your business strategy. You can go and ask for help. And ideally, you will get some useful advice that will make you think, yeah, okay, I can do that. So, just to summarise what I was banging on about, there's no two ways about it. The internet has made a huge benefit in the way society can operate and interoperate, and we saw that really with the way we were able to continue our lives broadly with the impact of the pandemic, social contact, business, and so forth. But of course, even during the same period, we saw other bad actors coming to the fore, because that's the nature of life, and it is just part of the difficulties we've got. The regret, I guess, is that the internet was designed with only the best in mind, and as a consequence, these add-ons became the way we had to control it and manage it. But we can't carry on with the basic safeguards we need to protect our identities and our information having to be achieved by add-ons and always being alert to where the adversaries are at and what they're trying to achieve. It would be better if a lot of these things were just built in. So, as I've said, I think that's happening, but the top-up and the way our communications and technology suppliers provide it, we need all that to get smarter and slicker and a lot less scratchy. It would be so much smoother for us to be able to develop new technologies and getting a lot of those security assurances in at an earlier time. So, as I've said, if you get that effective cyber approach in early in the investment cycle, early in any change cycle, know that you're using sound technology with a good support approach, that should make life easier. And it should mean that it's easier not just to make the change initially, but to maintain that until you need to replace it. So, good. And again, I think that is generally happening, but do not miss the opportunity to ensure it happens if you're given a chance in the organisation you work. Finally, the rate of technological change is not likely to reduce, and therefore the adversaries are going to have an advantage as that technology keeps changing, and therefore there will be vulnerabilities. And potentially the best way to keep a lid on that is to have the inherent security built in to the solutions more robustly than today. And ideally from that built-in cyber secure by design will become the new norm. So, finished just about on time, and I'm at the point where I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Questions from the room? No? Okay. I have a question for you.
Okay.
Okay. What's the one message people should take away from this session?
Keep cyber in mind from the outset. Keep it in mind as you work.
Yeah. Front and centre. Yeah?
Front and centre.
Yeah. And what does the next 12 to 18 months look like?
I would say that we'll see a move towards more thoughtful management of cloud solutions, more support to smaller organisations in the way they invest, the ability for them to consult more readily with security expertise in the cloud providers in particular. So as they want to make changes or consume these services, they will be able to consume that security advice at an earlier time.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you. That was a great talk.